Hello, everyone. I am Luke Reinhardt. Welcome to Closing the Gap, a podcast dedicated to your growth. Brought to you by Wellspring Coaching Services and hosted by myself and my wife, Katie. You know, people have gaps that prevent them from growing. Our goal is to empower you to close those gaps by increasing your awareness, confidence, and clarity. Join us today as we help you close the gap between where you are and where you want to be. All right, well, welcome to our podcast. This is season 1, episode 1.
Yeah.
Our very first podcast, so bear with us as we learn the ways of podcasting.
We're newbies.
We are newbies to this. But we are excited. We have a lot of, I think, valuable information to share with you guys.
Yes, we do.
And we're really excited for this journey.
Yeah, for sure.
So this podcast, we named it Closing the Gap.
Yeah.
And for multiple reasons, we named it Closing the Gap. And one, as a lifetime martial artist and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, closing the distance, closing the gap is a big part of that. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you learn in martial arts is distance management. You have to learn to manage the distance. If you manage the distance, you manage the damage. So you either you want to be too far away to get hurt, or you want to be in too close to get hurt. And what I mean by that is when you clinch and grab somebody, you're so connected that they can't do any serious damage to you. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I'm standing kind of in that middle spot or in the hot spot, you can get seriously hurt. You can get knocked out in that range. So that's kind of like the danger zone. So you want to be too far away or in too close. And we kind of have this concept of being able to close the gap and kind of seeing that as a way of moving forward and chasing our goals, whether it be personal growth goals or any kind of goal you may have. It doesn't matter. It's just kind of closing the gap. And we all have gaps in our growth, gaps that prevent us from growing. And we're going to be talking about that today. But the overall concept of the podcast is helping you guys learn to close the gap by increasing your awareness and your confidence and your clarity. So on the flip side of that, we're calling it close the gap. But as we said, managing the distance is also sometimes about creating boundaries, creating distance. And so we'll be talking about that as well. That sometimes is an important part of your growth, is to create healthy boundaries. So we'll be talking about that in a later podcast as well. So as far as our own personal gaps, we have to learn to identify what those gaps are. That's part of awareness, is learning first, what are those gaps? And then second, what's my gap? How many gaps do I have, right, to close? These prevention gaps, these things that are preventing us from growing or preventing us from moving forward. And then after that, once we've discovered it, we have to learn how to actually game plan to actually safely and effectively close that distance so that we can reach our goal, right? So, Katie, what do you think are some of these prevention gaps? We're taking these from John Maxwell's 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth.
Which I'm glad you said that, the title of the book, and I always bomb that.
Do you want to kick us off on what some of these prevention gaps are?
Yeah, sure. And good job explaining closing the gap. That was good.
Thank you very much.
Well done, honey, for your first time. Yeah, so we have a list, like Luke said, from the John Maxwell book, and we're sort of functioning off of that. There's 8 prevention gaps that are common, and the first one we're calling he calls the assumption gap. And basically, the assumption gap is assuming that you're going to grow. Sort of like, I equate it to the idea of time heals all wounds. And that's, we know this isn't always true. Just because we sign up for a program, a course, college, some kind of advanced training course and we just show up doesn't naturally mean that we're going to learn more just because we show up to class. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it makes me think of, consistency, which is obviously very important. They say consistency is key, but sometimes it has to be a little bit more than that. There has to be some intention
Exactly.
Behind that consistency in order to grow.
Yeah. And you brought up the point about awareness, which you'll probably hear us say that like 3 million times on this podcast. And pretty much our strong belief is that if you don't have awareness, you don't grow. And that it's the main element, the launch point from which you will get from point A to point B. Oftentimes we don't even know where we want to get to until we know where we're starting from. And so we're talking a lot about awareness through this podcast, and we'll be giving out more content of how to do that. There's lots of tools to build awareness. And that's just going to be a super important part of the journey. But assuming that, we do all have these gaps, we sort of want to know what they might be. First one, again, we said was assumption. The second one would be knowledge. So the knowledge gap shows up in the form of, I don't know how to grow. And that's common. Like a lot of times I want to learn to cook something better, right? Or I want to make a particular recipe. And I don't know how to do it. I don't know even how to begin. I'm not skilled. Maybe it says sift the flour. I have no idea what that is. So there's this frustration about not knowing how to do it. And so hopefully, if that is where you feel like you have a gap, that this podcast will help you with that. Our goal is to continually provide content for you to try to help you get through some of these gaps. So it's a common one, a knowledge gap.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I mean, I kind of tend to kind of sit back and observe until I feel like I've learned how to do something. You know what I mean? And I've kind of have learned, I guess, the art of self-learning. Like I know how to close that gap. I know how to learn about the things that I don't know if I'm interested in moving forward with it, So, but yeah, I can definitely relate to the knowledge gap.
And that'll be something hopefully you'll share with listeners and viewers too, is how that self-learning piece is so, it's such a skill set for you and a gift and something that you can offer to other people who don't naturally know how to do that too. So we'll look forward to that in the future. Number 3 is the timing gap. And, gosh, I feel like this as a busy mom, a busy parent, but busy business owner. It's when is the right time to begin? Like, I don't know when I should start. Maybe you have this wonderful idea for a business you want to start, but you don't know, when to do that. So there can be a gap in just waiting for that right moment and thinking that there's going to be this perfect moment too. And just not being sure and not being fully confident in pulling the trigger, so to speak, on that. Now,
there's, especially as a jiu-jitsu artist, I know that, good timing has a lot of value.
Yeah, it does.
Right? Mm-hmm. So I think as we're listening to this and paying attention to these gaps, it's not always like, obviously there's value in having knowledge before doing something. There's value in doing it at the right time. But these are things that things that hold different people back, right? Like it's preventing you from moving forward and consistently, I would say, right? Like it's kind of a consistent possible fear or excuse.
That's what I was thinking.
To keep you from moving forward.
Yeah, it's just like the way timing gap would show up is it's just not the right time. I have to get this done before I can do it, or I have to get this done before I can do it. And so it's a constantly kicking, what is that phrase? Kicking the stone down the path. I'm going to totally mess it up. Kicking the ball down the path. Yeah. But, you just keep pushing it. And then before you know it, 10 years has gone by and you thought, oh my goodness, I thought I would have had this and this and this done. But you continue to just push it off. And so, that becomes a gap for you that you want to close. You want to close that. Another one that we'll talk about is, we're calling it, or John calls it, the mistake gap. And it's being afraid of making a mistake. And I can resonate with this one. Like, I'm going to botch this. It's going to be horrible. I'll regret that I did it, or I'll hurt somebody in the process, or blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's just a million things. Or there'll be a liability issue for me in this, or, it can go on and on and on. And we'll talk more later too, but certain personalities will tend to resonate with different of these prevention gaps. And this just really syncs well with my personality to be concerned about that. But that is a very common one that people come up against.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And following that, which is a close cousin to the mistake gap, is the perfection gap. And that's pretty much just, I have to get this perfect before I even start. So a lot of times people who are in this place, they really want to have it all mapped out and all worked out before they even begin. They want to know the beginning, the middle, and the end before they even start. And yes, we've said, like, there is value to definitely planning things out and mapping it out. But, realistically speaking, it's very hard to know all points, all pieces of a journey before you start. Mm-hmm. So if that is the gap that you are like, oh yeah, that's me, there's something to self-talking through that and realizing, yeah, this isn't going to be perfect, but I'm going to give it my perfect effort. There's ways through that. And we'll talk more about those in the future. Yeah. Number 6, inspiration gap. This one, I think a lot of people can feel this one. And that's basically like, I have this plan, I have this idea, but I don't feel like doing it today. Like, I just don't feel it. Like, if I wake up and I don't feel like doing it or putting the effort in, it's not going to get done. So it's a little bit more on the emotive side. It's a little bit more emotion-based, where you really, you're waiting for that moment to feel like it. Like, you need the inspiration, and that's what's going to push you through, rather than relying more on the commitment or the perseverance to getting to where you want to get to. Does that resonate with you at all? Not so.
I mean, I think all of them do at different times.
Yeah.
It's definitely not my primary one, but yeah.
Yeah.
I can relate to all of them at different times for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of the inspiration gap is connected to discipline too. And someone who is a martial artist, a lifelong martial artist, has probably worked through that discipline. Like, you do it just because you're doing it, not because you feel like it. But this is, and trusting that, okay, that'll all work out. The feelings will come into place later. So, but yeah, very common gap. Number 7 is the comparison gap. And this one, again, common too, is, others can do this better than I can. Why would I even throw my hat in the ring? If others can do this better, I'm going to look like a fool. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm not the best. I'm not the brightest bulb in this bunch here. So, you already kind of defeat yourself before you even begin. And, so that's a common gap, and it is unfortunate when that happens, for sure.
Yep.
Yeah. And last but not least is the expectation gap. And this one is really just centered around, really thinking that it was going to be easier. It was going to be easier. And, we talked about this before, but like marriage, like you get into marriage and you're like, oh, it's so great. This is awesome. And then you hit some bumps and you hit some hard places, and you think right away, man, I thought this was going to be easier. Or, your parenting, that's a big, chunk of, oh gosh, raising kids will be so fun. And yes, it is fun. And yes, there's some really hard places in there too. And feeling frustration. But when you're setting out to do a project and you think, I know what I'm doing, I'm excited about doing it, and you get going, and then all of a sudden you hit a hard spot. Maybe you're trying to build or rebuild an engine or something like that. And you think, all right, I know what I'm doing. I know the parts. I know how to do this. But all of a sudden something's not lining up, and you immediately can't get this done because you're frustrating yourself thinking that, okay, this should have been easier.
I would say the expectation gap is probably the number one killer of New Year's resolutions, right?
Oh,
I mean,
totally,
like, 'cause
totally.
you kind of throw all the other stuff out the window. You make all these resolutions, and then it's like, you get started, and it's like, this is a little bit, harder than I thought it was going to be.
Harder to commit. Diets too.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, that goes under resolutions, I guess. But I was thinking exercise resolutions when you were saying that, because we get a lot of people will, sign up at our martial arts school too and say, okay, I'm going to do this, but then there's things that are tough about training in any sport.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's a sport or like, playing the guitar or playing an instrument or
learning a language.
Yeah. Any of those things. Like, that's what I'm going to do this year. Or that's what I'm going to do right now. And you get started and like, this is actually going to take some work.
Yeah. The fun kind of goes down and the effort has to go up a little.
Yeah, when it goes from like a goal to a job, it changes a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So just to review, those are the 8 common gaps. These are found in John Maxwell's 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth. He outlines these, and we love his material. We're using that now to bring that to you. And those are the assumption gap, number 1, the knowledge gap, the timing gap, the mistake gap, the perfection gap, the inspiration gap, comparison gap, and the expectation gap.
Yeah, very good. So, guys, you need to be thinking about what is your gap? How many gaps do you have, I guess? But where do you kind of fall in line? Something should resonate with you. If you're really thinking about personal growth or achieving goals, any of those kind of things, you might be right on time right now and getting things started and moving forward, but we always kind of hit that point where that gap starts to set in, where maybe it's harder than we thought. Maybe we started and we feel like people are better than we are, so we're like hesitant to jump in. Any of those gaps, right? So be considering which gap resonates with you, because this has to do again with awareness. If you want to grow, you have to learn about yourself. That's another one of John Maxwell's quotes. Actually, it's you have to know yourself to grow yourself. And this is a big part of learning about yourself. You have to kind of honestly sit down and evaluate, where do I struggle? What is my gap? What's preventing me from moving forward? And really think deeply about that and consider it, because you can't make a plan to move forward until you've acknowledged the gap.
Yeah, and I think there is a common misconception that we're not ever really going backwards.
Right.
But the reality is you're either moving forward or you're going backwards. You're not really staying in one place.
Yeah.
And that applies to multiple areas of your life. So you have to be actively moving forward. You have to pursue growth. Otherwise, you are sort of becoming more dulled in those skills and those senses and in those particular areas.
Absolutely.
So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, I'm good, I'm good right where I am, just know by tomorrow you won't be right where you are if you're not actively pursuing that. And that's kind of the reality of it. So but
that's where consistency is key, right?
Yeah.
And I can totally relate in, jiu-jitsu. You can train jiu-jitsu for years, but then if you get an injury or something and you have to stop, those skills, they are going to start fading. You're going to kind of like maybe forget some of the techniques that you use, but more so than that, it's going to be things like the timing and the base, the balance, those things that you can only get and maintain through the actual live grappling. Those elements are going to fade. Your overall fitness level, endurance, all that stuff's going to fade. You're not going to. So you're either moving forward or you're moving backwards.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
So allow us to help you move forward. That's our goal. We want to help you guys close the gap. We want to help you move forward, and we hope this podcast has helped you some in that area today.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining us in our first podcast. Yay. We hope you
Come
were
back.
able to make it through. No, we do hopefully, we hope that
We
you
hope
guys
to get
will
better.
come back and join us again next time. Just
Yeah.
make sure that now you're reviewing, thinking about what your gap is. And we will be talking about creating boundaries here shortly as well.
Yep. Tune in next time.
All right. till
Thanks
next
for
time, you guys.
listening.
Thanks for listening.